Today's deck tech is gonna ask,
Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
but not because luck is involved, but because there are so many triggers you're gonna need a little luck to remember everything going on. But if you want to sling spells like a budget Josh Lee Kwai, then this is the deck for you. Teysa, Opulent Oligarch, is the commander for this deck and has recently appeared on game nights.
My partner in crime is Teysa, Opulent Oligarch.
Death does not free you from me.
While we might not have the card selection of Josh Lee Kwai, we can definitely do some very similar stuff for a fraction of the budget. If slowly draining your opponents out while controlling the board like a true Oligarch, then this is the deck for you. Teysa, Opulent Oligarch is a 3-mana, 1 generic, 1 black, and 1 white, 2/3 legendary creature human advisor that has Death Touch and says, at the beginning of your end step, investigate for each opponent who lost life this turn. And, whenever a clue you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this deck looks to do several different things. 1. We want to drain the table every turn, so we can get clues to turn into either card draw or use the clues for other card sacrifice abilities. 2. We use Teysa to make the creatures when we crack clues that in turn trigger other cards for creatures entering or leaving the battlefield. Basically, when the deck is in full swing, everything is a trigger. This makes the deck feel like a real domino effect. Each trigger bleeds into the next, and before you know it, we're standing on top of a huge pile of triggers that slowly drain the life away from our opponents. Starting with our creatures. Disciple of the Vault drains for artifacts leaving, and with treasure still being a huge thing in the format, it doesn't always have to be our clues to get that trigger. Dockside Chef turns artifacts or creatures into card draw. Leonin Elder gains us life whenever an artifact comes into play. Again, not just ours. Lunarch Veteran gains us life whenever a creature we control enters the battlefield. Parasite Thrall is an interesting one because it has Extort, so we can piggyback a lot of drain and gain off of it, but it also has an interesting effect of removing a counter from a non-land permanent, which while not always relevant, I'm sure will come up more than you think. Becerra Seer is a sack outlet. Bartolome del Presidio is again another sack outlet. Chronomancer has flying, but more importantly it can tap and sack an artifact for card draw. Corpse Knight turns our creatures into draining effects. Cruel Celebrant is a Blood Artist effect. Dauntless Dismantler pulls major weight by slowing down other decks so we have time to get our game plan online. Dreg Recycler is a once-a-turn sack effect to drain the table. General's Enforcer has some graveyard hate on it, but we mostly play it for the indestructible humans part. Moldfolk has lifelink, but also we can pay 1 mana to sack either an artifact or a creature to grow it. Syndicate Trafficker is again another great sack outlet with the added benefit of gaining indestructible. Acolyte of Aclazotz, tap and drain. Bygone Bishop lets us investigate whenever we cast a creature spell with mana value 3 or less, which shouldn't be hard since the deck only has 8 out of 33 creatures that wouldn't trigger it. Defiant Salvager is a free unlimited sack outlet. Feign the Broker is a real toolbox of different effects to kind of fit what we need. We can make treasure, give counters, or make flyers. Real triple threat. Lobelia, Defender of Bagin, not only lets us sacrifice an artifact, she also lets us either play cards from our opponent's decks that we exile when she ETBs, but we can also drain for 2 life and give us back 2 as well. Marauding Blight Priest is a personal favorite of mine with its simple effect of each time we gain life, each opponent loses 1. Nadier's Nightblade drains the table each time a token we control leaves the battlefield. Rumor Gatherer provides scrying with its Alliance ability, but when the second trigger happens we get to draw a card instead. Welcoming Vampire lets us draw 1 card per turn when a creature with power 2 or less ETBs, which the tokens that we make with Teysa also being once a turn, when we sacrifice clues, this can feed into itself netting us a card during other people's turns. Wojak Investigator has flying and vigilance, but also lets us investigate for each opponent who has more cards in their hand. Cliffhaven Vampire is another way we gain life, drain life, but it also comes with the added benefit of flying. Mirkwood Bats is a huge card for the deck, draining for both making tokens and when those tokens leave. Solemn Simulacrum gets a land on ETB and draws us a card when it leaves. Wisp Drinker Vampire has flying and drains our opponents each time a creature with power 2 or less ETBs under our control. Then, it also has the upside of being able to pay 7 mana to give all those creatures lifelink and death touch until the end of turn. Epicure of Blood, another we gain it drains effect. Malevolent Witchkite can be huge card draw depending on how many artifacts you have to sacrifice at the time. Nadir, Agent of the Duskanel, gets bigger when a token leaves, but when Nadir leaves we get to make tokens equal to her power. Lastly, if draining 120 life total from everyone seems difficult, how about just draining 30? Persuasive Interrogators gives this deck a huge win con, and each time we sacrifice a clue, target opponent gets 2 poison counters, which can very quickly turn into a 1-turn KO for the table with the right setup. Our sorceries mostly deal with a lot of recursion, but we have some removal and card draw in there as well. Starting with Eaten Alive. Exile removal and all we have to do is trade a body.
I'll make that deal.
Unearth. Call a Surprise Witness not only brings something 3 CMC back, it also brings it back with a flying counter. Rite of Oblivion has flashback, exiles a permanent, and we sacrifice something in return. It does everything we want. Sign in Blood. Angelic Purge again is more removal. Back for seconds gets stuff back into our hand, but if we bargain for it, which we will most of the time since we should have clues to spare, it gets something back to our hand but puts something 4 CMC or less onto the battlefield. Patch Up can either return multiple things or one larger thing, which is just great. Read the Bones. Victimize gets us 2 things back from our graveyard, and Monumental Corruption is huge card draw depending on how many artifacts we have. In response, let's go to our instance. Costly Plunder. Dire Tactics is even more removal. Fanatical Offering not only draws us 2, but also leaves a map token. Kaya's Guile offers us modal options of each opponent sacrificing a creature, exiling all cards from each opponent's graveyard, or creating a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, but it also has Entwine in case you want to do them all. Rootborn Defense gives protection with a population upside, and Treacherous Greed is a huge draw and drain option, and all we have to do is sacrifice a creature that dealt damage this turn. Artifacts help bring in a little more card draw and mana, as well as ways to put those clues to work. Wayfarer's Bauble. Idol of Oblivion is card draw if we make a token that turn, but in a pinch we can make a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. Orzhov's Signet. Tyrion's Journal lets us sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw a card, but again if we need, we can flip it over to its land side, the Tomb of Aklazotz, which lets us cast a creature spell from our graveyard, though it will enter with the finality counter and be a vampire in addition to its other types. But it actually has some surprising synergy with Parasite Thrall like we talked about before. Lastly, Inspiring Statuary turns those clues into pseudo mana rocks to help cast other spells. We also run one battle in Invasion of Tolvada, which lets us return 1 non-battle permanent from our graveyard to the battlefield. But when you flip the battle over, our tokens get +1/+0, and at the beginning of our end step, we create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. Enchantments bring it on home. Dreadhorde Invasion will give us a token every turn we can usually find a use for. Griffin Airy gives us griffins if we gain 3 life during our turn. Limdol's Hex will drain the table every turn, including us, but with Teysa that means 3 clues every turn. Underhanded Design is another way to make artifacts work for us by paying 1 when an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, draining our opponents and gaining us a little life. It also provides removal if we sacrifice it while we have 2 artifacts. Agent of the Iron Throne will let Teysa bring the drain all by herself. Inspiring Leader turns the little 1/1 flyers we make into 3/3s, which can be a little scarier when you're staring them all down. Retreat to Hagra, drain on landfall, absolutely. Lastly, Ill-Gotten Inheritance drains the table on your upkeep, but we can pay 6 and sacrifice it to deal 4 damage and gain 4 life. Finally, the lands. Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Tainted Field, 15 plains, and 17 swamps. That's the deck. This deck doesn't have any combos, but layering your triggers and remembering all of them will be your biggest hurdle. But if you like this style of deck, it's definitely worth it. At time of recording, this deck sits just under $25, making it an excellent deal for any Orzhov Oligarch wannabes. If you're looking to upgrade the deck, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Talisman of Hierarchy are great mana rocks to upgrade to help speed the deck along. Reprocess, while almost making the cut for this main deck, unfortunately is almost $4, so into the upgrade section it goes. Sanctum of Stonefang is another great addition that just barely missed the budget. Creeping Bloodsucker, fantastic way to get the drain online before Teysa, which means Teysa can come in and collect 3 clues right away. Wound Reflection, Bloodletter of Aclazotz, Sanguine Bond, Veto Thorn of the Duskrose, Archfiend of Despair, and Exquisite Blood doubles down on the drain gain aspects of the deck, racing your opponents to the bottom that much faster. Lastly, if you can afford it, a Smothering Tithe can really help ramp into everything else, as well as give some extra synergies when our artifacts leave the battlefield drain effects. Moving right into cards to cut, Lunarch Veteran is good, but if we really want to steer into a life gain direction, there are better options. I'd cut it. Dreg Recycler is a once a turn, which we could substitute for something that could trigger multiple times. I'd cut it. Monumental Corruption is good, but it's too depending on having a bunch of clues in play, which you are actively sacrificing, so I'd cut it. Griffin Airy is good, but it's sometimes difficult to get the life gain while also holding up mana so you can sacrifice stuff on other people's turns for maximum efficiency. I'd cut it. Ill-Gotten Inheritance is also really good on a budget, but with a bigger budget, it kind of falls flat. I'd cut it. Well, that's been the deck with some upgrades and cards to cut. Let me know your favorite card from the deck or a commander you would like to see built on a budget. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe as it goes a long way to supporting the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.